Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Walk Beside Me podcast. My name is Brooklyn Bird and we are talking today and every day about how the gospel of Jesus Christ applies to parenting. If you are listening to or watching this podcast on the day it is released, it is July 26th, which is really crazy because it is exactly 1 week before my due date with my second baby, which is so exciting. I have been contemplating for a while if I want to take a break from releasing podcast episodes during my postpartum period, and I was feeling really confident about taking a break for a while until very recently. I have seen a lot of progress with the podcast in the last couple of weeks, a lot of new listeners. So if you're new here, welcome and thank you for being here. I really feel like God is giving me this extra growth and affirmation right now because He is encouraging me to be consistent and stay consistent even after I have the baby. So my plan right now is to continue releasing weekly episodes. There's a good chance that the ones that I release shortly after my baby is born will be a little shorter than normal. They might even just be little 5-minute thoughts, but I just wanted to let you guys know that's my plan. So keep showing up. And also I'm really excited to share my birth story after it happens. So I will definitely be dropping an episode about that as well. Since I am giving birth so soon, I wanted to make sure I recorded today's episode today. I've been wanting to do this episode for a while now, especially knowing that there are a lot of new listeners here, a lot of people that don't know me personally. I got a lot of really positive feedback on episode 20, which was about my journey through law school and having a job as an attorney and then eventually deciding to become a stay-at-home mom. I think that it resonated with a lot of people because I showed a side of myself that I don't always show on these episodes. A lot of times I just get straight to the point and I talk about the books that I'm reading, the principles I'm learning, the scriptures that are resonating with me. And I do share some stories from my personal life. Definitely a lot of experiences with my daughter Brea and with my wonderful husband Trenton, also known as T-Bird. But I haven't really shared a lot about who I am and why I'm here, why I'm making this podcast, and why you should even be listening to me in the first place. I did share some thoughts about this in my very first episode. I explained why I wanted to start the podcast and what it's going to be about. But even with that episode, I've actually had people reach out to me and say like, hey, I want to know more about you. I want to know more about why you're doing this, what got you into it, why are you so passionate about it. So I thought I would just share that story. And really it's a tale of two stories. It's a tale of development of myself as a person as well as development of myself as a parent. So I'll start with the personal side of it and I'll give you guys as much detail as I can just to keep it interesting. I am the oldest in my family. I'm in a family of 5 kids and I was born to really amazing parents. I honestly have had a really blessed childhood. I don't have lots of bad memories. In fact, most of my memories are really sweet, happy, and content. I felt safe for all of my childhood, and for that reason, in a lot of ways, I wanted to parent very similarly to how my parents did. There are parts of me, however, that have existed since childhood, and I don't know if they necessarily were given to me by my parents. I think it was more a product of my environment, perhaps the way I was educated in school and the environment I grew up with in my elementary school years that turned me into a really type A perfectionist, somewhat of a people pleaser, at least someone who has been previously really concerned about what other people think of me and been really afraid of disappointing other people or of people judging me. I think a lot of that came from the nature of the hobbies that I chose as a child. I chose to play violin, and if you play violin, you probably just know like the culture around violin is very perfectionist. It is very competitive, and especially in Utah where I lived for the first 12 years of my life, it is extremely competitive. So there's that, the culture around playing violin, the constant competitiveness of that. Also, I was placed in my school's gifted program is what it was called at the time. I'm sure it has a more politically correct name now, but that's what it was called back then. I was surrounded by kids that are extremely high achievers, which was awesome. And I think beneficial to be around in a lot of ways. But at the same time, again, there's lots of comparison, lots of competitiveness, and lots of fear of letting down teachers and being dropped from the program if you couldn't keep up. And so much praise for being smart and for being well behaved and for being perfect. In fact, I played into this so much. I remember that I had lots of friends growing up that would tell me things like, "Oh, Brooklyn, you're so perfect." That sounds like I'm trying to brag when I say that, but I really don't see it as a flex. And even at the time, I didn't like when people were telling me that I was perfect. There was something about it that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, they didn't necessarily mean it as in I'm a super awesomely developed human, but rather like I just never make mistakes. I never let anyone down. I'm a goody two-shoes. And even though it was probably a somewhat accurate description of how I was, I didn't really like it. But I also didn't know how to change it. I didn't want to be rebellious. I didn't want to hurt other people. I didn't want to make my parents look bad or, just start getting bad grades. I wasn't rebellious at all, but I knew that I wanted something more to me than just being perfect. And yet perfectionism is still what I chased after for most of my youth and young adulthood. I continued to be extremely high achieving in high school. I took as many AP classes as possible. I was on the cross country team, running insane numbers of miles every morning before school with the team and competing at state and regional levels in that sport. Also continued playing violin and also continued wanting to get good grades all the time. And this all started coming to a head in my junior year of high school when I developed an autoimmune disease that's called psoriasis. You might have heard of it already, but if you haven't, the way the doctor explained it to me is that your immune system thinks there's something wrong, almost as if you're getting attacked by a disease. So the immune system fights back and it attacks the skin. I have dealt with psoriasis since I was about 17 years old. And luckily it's mostly hidden. It's mostly on my scalp and on my back, but it's kind of this annoying thing. At least it used to be annoying. And now I kind of count it as a blessing because it really was a physical sign that something was wrong with the way that I was viewing the world and myself. I was in this constant state of fear of what others thought and fear of messing up, fear of failure that was not only damaging to my soul and spirit and relationships, but also even to my physical body. At the same time that erupted, when I was 17 years old, I started having questions about God and if God really existed, and went through a whole faith crisis. And I did gain my testimony of God back eventually. That testimony went up and down for a while until I decided to serve a mission for my church. And by the time I decided to serve my mission to Sweden, which was when I was 19 years old, so I had graduated high school, I'd been at BYU for college for a year, my testimony was a lot stronger than it had ever been. And I do think I was starting to get a taste of God's love. However, in a lot of ways kept myself from really feeling that love because of this perfectionist mentality that I had, because I was never really happy with myself and I didn't believe that anyone else was really happy with me. And as long as I wasn't doing better than everyone else around me in every single way, if I wasn't perfectly achieving, I attached my worth to that, and I could get really, really down on myself sometimes. And I actually thought that that was what God wanted. Up until very recently, I believed that if we weren't measuring up to God's standards, which I saw as incredibly impossibly high, that he was disappointed in us, and the only way to really redeem ourselves was to make sure we showed him that we felt really bad about where we were at, that we viewed ourselves as sinners, as completely lost without Christ, and basically less than human, like horrible people, but for the grace of Jesus Christ. That's what I thought it meant to be a Christian, and that's what I thought it meant to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ, was to just basically hate myself and constantly admit to God that I wasn't really worthy of anything and count myself lucky to ever be forgiven. When I was 22 years old, I got married to my husband, Trenton. I call him T-Bird, so you might have heard me call him that before. I, at that point, started to realize that this way I viewed myself and the way I viewed God wasn't only going to be harmful to me, but also would be harmful to my husband. Before marriage, I never really projected my perfectionism on other people. In fact, I think I was pretty merciful with other people, and I really only expected perfectionism from myself. Once I was married to my husband, who is actually the closest to perfect human that I know, I started to project my perfectionism onto him. I kind of saw him as a part of myself. And I mean, the scriptures do say that when you get married, you're one flesh. And I took that to a mental extreme where any mistake my husband made, I took it personally to the point that it really wasn't helpful for our relationship at all. And in the same way that in order for me to believe that I was forgiven. I had to make sure that I personally felt really bad for my mistakes. I also saw my husband the same way, where I couldn't forgive him even for the smallest, silliest mistakes until I could see that he felt really bad for what he had done. I used lots of guilt tripping and shaming techniques. I am sad that I functioned that way so much, but I, at the same time, have mercy for myself because it's all that I knew. I didn't really know a different way, and I was doing my best at the time. And even now, people that function that way, I wouldn't judge them. I just feel bad for them because they're really just hurting themselves and others, and they don't know a better way. And I honestly didn't really understand or know a better way until I became a parent. That's why becoming a mom has been the best thing that has ever happened to me. When I chose to become a mom, I didn't feel ready at all. I was in law school at the time, so you can guess that I was still a perfectionist, still extremely high achieving. I was self-aware enough to know that the way I treated my husband, the way that I treated his mistakes, and the way I treated my own was not how I wanted to function with my children. And I would talk to my husband about this all the time. Every time I'd get upset with him and then 10 minutes later realize how irrational I was being and be so sad about it and apologizing to him and crying, I would tell him, I don't think I can be a mom. Look at how I'm treating you. How am I supposed to take care of sweet little babies that are probably going to be testing my patience much more than you do as this really incredible, super developed, best husband in the world that I could ever imagine. You are as close to perfection as I know in any human, and yet I still am struggling to be patient. How am I going to do that with my own children? How am I going to do that with toddlers who are throwing tantrums? And how am I going to do that with teenagers who might slam doors in my face? How am I going to control my emotions and respond better than I do to you, the most patient and kind and intentional person that I know? And my husband would always just tell me, I'm not worried, Brooklyn. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be okay. But thank goodness for his confidence, because without it, I don't know if we ever would have had children. He just had so much faith in us, and I decided, you know what, let's go for it. And hopefully God will just teach me what I need to know in order to raise these babies. And my goodness, did he ever do that? My daughter Brea was born in July of 2023. And at the time she was born, I would say I still was pretty wrapped up in this perfectionist mentality. I was still very afraid of imposing that on her. The parenting resources I started with when I became a mom kind of actually did encourage me to see babies and children with a critical eye, with this perfectionist mentality, comparing my child to other children. Luckily, those resources that I read, even though they would have fit perfectly into this narrative that I've held for myself my whole life, somehow, probably by the Spirit of God, it did not click with me. Another reason is that my daughter Brea just did not want to follow by the rules that these parenting resources laid out. And that was actually a huge blessing for me. One of the ones that I started out reading that was not very helpful, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, was a sleep training book that basically told parents that if they followed this sleep schedule and feeding schedule with their children perfectly, then their children would turn out perfect. It was like, here's the formula to have successful, independent, smart, healthy children. And if you don't follow this formula, yikes, you're in trouble. That was something that my perfectionist brain would latch onto, my fearful, people-pleasing mentality. This book was written for me. But luckily, Brea was so resistant to this sleep schedule that I tried to put her on that I really had to start questioning the way that the book laid things out, the way that the book talked about children and talked about what sleep and feeding is supposed to look like between parent and child. I wanted to read one quote from this book that demonstrates how the book laid out this dichotomy between parents who follow its instructions and those who don't. Parents who follow the rules and get it right, and those who don't and are just winging it, not following a sleep schedule at all, but just following their baby's cues. It says that a baby following the sleep schedule will probably be sleeping 10 hours a night by week 12. Other babies, on the other hand, will still be waking 2 or 3 times a night to snack. To their mother's dismay, this pattern is apt to continue for 2 very long years with mutual discontentment. And it's so funny because the book is basically telling parents up front how they should feel about their children's night wakings. It's telling parents that they should be discontent with them, that there's a problem with them. And it's funny because at the time, and this is why I started to question this book, I noticed that really the only discontentment I felt in relation to waking up to feed my baby in the middle of the night was actually just coming from the thought that I wasn't following this book's rules. And it wasn't really coming from how I actually felt towards my baby or even towards waking up in the middle of the night, but rather it was this script that the book had provided me telling me how I should feel about it. It was really only a problem because the book was calling it a problem. And it's hilarious reading this now because the book got it right when it says that the pattern of night feedings will likely continue for 2 years if you do choose to feed your child at night. At least from my experience with one baby, that has been the case. However, the mutual discontentment is the opposite of true. I nursed my daughter Brea until she was about 18 months old, so I guess it was 1.5 years, not 2 years. But even when I stopped nursing her, she would continue to wake up once or twice a night. And once I decided to stop feeling the way that this book was telling me to feel, it has been total mutual contentment between me and her. I do not mind waking up in the middle of the night at all for her. In fact, I love being the one that she calls for in the middle of the night. It is an honor and a privilege. And yes, there have been sleep-deprived times, but once I accepted that and I realized that I didn't have to be discontent with it and I could just accept it as a normal, healthy part of a baby growing up and of being a mom, I came to really enjoy night feedings and I came to really enjoy being the one that my daughter wanted in the middle of the night. I'm grateful for that whole experience because it made me become more picky about the parenting resources that I consumed. And it also steered me away from the ones that did set up this perfectionist view of parenting that might have resonated with me at any other point in my life, but luckily, thanks to Brea not sleeping through the night and not wanting to get on a sleep schedule, they wouldn't work for us. So I started looking for other resources. My husband and I eventually decided that the safest, best thing for us to do with our daughter was actually to figure out how to safely bed share with her. And the reason for this is that I was in law school at the time, and since I had class during the day and I had homework during the day, I didn't take naps during the day. And that meant that waking up in the middle of the night to feed her, sitting up in a chair, was actually quite dangerous. There were a few close calls where I almost put her in a very dangerous position because I had nodded off while nursing her in the middle of the night, trying to keep myself awake, trying to sit up in a chair. And so I reached out to a friend who I knew was bed sharing already. Her name is Summer, and she was really a lifesaver during this time. She gave me reassurance and she pointed me to a lot of resources about how to safely bed share with babies, which helped me realize that it was actually a very common practice around the whole entire world outside of the US. It's especially common in Asia. I'm not saying that bed sharing is for everyone, but this was a helpful way for me to start questioning the way that we parent children in the West and the way that we look at children in the West, the way that we look at their needs and desires. And maybe the fact that a baby wants to nurse in the middle of the night is not a sign that the baby is an attention-seeking, self-centered little creature, but actually just that closeness and physical touch and, yes, night feeding are a normal human need that is accepted and embraced in most other parts of the world. As I was doing research on how to safely bed share, I found a creator named Taylor Tulick, and I started listening to her podcast. She's an occupational therapist who specializes in infant sleep, and I listened to one of her episodes where she interviewed Caitlin Straight, who is also known as the Mellow Mama on social media. And Caitlin is not a specialist in infant sleep per se, but she is a conscious parenting coach. And it was really the first time that I was exposed to this concept of conscious parenting. And when I heard this interview between Taylor and Caitlin, which I will link in the show notes, it blew my mind. Listening to Caitlin describe the way that she views her children and the way she views children generally, it rocked my world. As I listened to it, I was like, this is it. This is how I want to view my children. As soon as I found these resources, there was an instant shift inside of me, and my husband even noticed it. A couple of days into me listening to the Mellow Mamas podcast and reading the books she recommended, my husband was like, Brooklyn, you're being so nice. I was like, I know, because I actually am seeing you with truthful eyes now. I'm actually seeing reality as reality is and not seeing everyone through a lens of blame and shame. I'm seeing people as people. I'm seeing you as a whole human whose priorities and schedule and the things that you want to do are just as important as the things that I want to do. It was amazing to see that shift happen in my marriage, and it's been so fun to see it start to play out in my relationship with my daughter, who's now 2 years old. And it was really cool because although I was super hungry for good parenting resources from the moment I knew that I was going to become a mom, and I was really hungry for good advice. I saw a lot of problems with the way that most advice is given. It seemed like a lot of advice was aimed at actually trying to control children. Just like with that sleep training book, it's like, here's the formula for how to make sure your kid turns out a certain way. If you do this, then you're going to get this. But I think that everyone knows fundamentally that we really can't control our children. And maybe some parenting resources acknowledge this, but they still try to get as close to control as possible, using threats, bribes, punishments, rewards, coercion, etc., to try to manipulate children's behavior. With that said, there still are parenting resources out there that literally talk about how parents need to be in control, which is a false concept. It's really not possible to control another human. And also, at the end of the day, even if we could control humans, if we could control our children, would we really want to? Would we really want our control as a parent to be the only reason that they are behaving the way that they are? Even if they're making all the quote-unquote right choices, do we want them to be making all the right choices just because we as the parent succeeded in gaining control over them? Another huge problem that I saw with most parenting advice was that it was really focused on tactics, but not the fundamental mindset of how to view children and how to view the parent-child relationship. I saw so many reels saying, here's a script for you the next time your child talks back to you, or like, here are 5 phrases your child needs to hear more often. And these are all well-intentioned things, and I know that having practical tools like that can be really helpful for some people, especially if you haven't had respectful communication modeled for you before. It can be really helpful to see what it can actually look like, and I do try to share stuff like that where I can. But I have a problem when that kind of advice is framed as a one-size-fits-all that is going to work for every child, work for every parent, and solve every problem in the book. Another problem I saw with traditional parenting resources was a lot of them would actually create a problem that wasn't even there in the first place. I saw this with that sleep training book. The book literally tells the reader how the reader should feel. The reader should be discontent with waking up in the middle of the night to feed their baby, even though it's totally possible to not be discontent with that. In fact, anything can be okay if you just decide that it's okay. And if it's okay with you, then it's okay. The only thing that makes something not okay is if you decide that it's not okay with you. But a lot of these books tell you what you should be okay with and what you shouldn't be okay with. And then in the same breath, they provide a cure for the disease that they created. For example, with the sleep training book, if your child wasn't getting on the schedule that it prescribed immediately and it wasn't working for your child, of course the book offered sign up for our membership so that we can give you coaching on how to get your child on this schedule. And it's just funny that they created this arbitrary schedule that if your child doesn't go on, they're offering to give you the medicine to cure this disease that they created. Whereas maybe there wasn't a disease at all. Maybe children don't have to be on a perfect schedule, and maybe everything is right just the way that nature made it. That was the cool thing about the Melalama and conscious parenting in general. It wasn't creating diseases and cures out of thin air, but is really pointing us back to nature, not just how we function biologically and how infant night wakings can be a natural biological phenomenon that will pass slowly with time and we don't have to try to force our babies on the schedule, but really getting back to our natural instincts as humans who want to be respectful to other humans. Really the notion that children don't need special tactics, special methods, special routines, or sticker charts, or anything like that. We need to view them as whole humans, the way that we would want anyone to view us, and treat them as such. I had so many aha moments as I consumed Caitlin's materials. I bought her online course, and it included a long list of books that she recommended to help parents develop this conscious mindset. One of those books is called A Theory of Objectivist Parenting by Rosalind Ross. It is one of my favorites. It's super short and simple, and that's why I love it so much. It gets straight to the point. And I wanted to share a few quotes from it that have really made an impact on me. And I also want to connect these quotes and principles that the book offers with the gospel of Jesus Christ, because making these connections between these resources and the gospel is how I started to shift my view of not only my daughter Brea and my future children, but also my view of myself and my view of my husband, and how I fundamentally changed how I want to interact with anyone that I'm trying to influence. First, the book says, When the parent controls the child's behavior with rewards and punishments, the parent severs the child's action from the child's values behind the action and makes himself the parent the value. Because the parent, not reality, determines when the child feels pain or pleasure, the child's entire orientation changes from reality to people as reality. For example, when a child hits and is put in timeout, his parents think they are teaching him to associate hitting with the pain of timeout. The child actually learns not that hitting will lead to pain, but rather that not pleasing his parents will lead to pain. The child does not need to study, understand, and conquer nature. If he wants to avoid pain, he needs to study, understand, and conquer his parents. Being in control of one's children, playing the part of the controller, a serene, loving dictator, it makes parenting seem so easy in our heads. In reality, the parent is controlled by his role that requires him to be in control. He has to mete out a punishment or reward based on the behavior of his child, and is then further controlled by how his child responds to his controls. These passages from this book made me realize how I do not want, as a parent or as a human in general, to help people change their behavior through coercion, through bribery and threats. And that doesn't just apply to my children. I don't want my husband to change how quickly he does the dishes just because he's acting out of fear of the way I'm going to punish him. Of course, I don't put my husband in timeout or spank him, but I did feel the need to punish through guilt tripping or blaming or shaming. And I would do the same thing to myself. And I realized I also don't want this to be why I do good things. I don't want to do the right thing out of fear of the way that I'm going to make myself feel if I do the wrong thing. I want to do the right thing because of, like this book says, because of reality, because of the real consequences of making good or bad choices. The question then is, if we're not going to try to control other people, but we do want to positively influence people, especially our children, we do want to shape who they become in some way, what is the best way to do that? And this book answers that as well. It says, if we do not get to be warmly authoritative, benevolent dictators to our children, but we absolutely do want to influence what kind of people they become, our only option is to have an awesome, present, respectful relationship with our children and model how to live an awesome life. This is actually a far more effective way to parent because regardless of what we think we are teaching with all our force and control, we teach what we are. The only way to raise a hero is to be one. So instead of obsessing over our children and trying to control them, trying to make them be the person we dream they could be, the best way to parent is to focus on ourselves and make ourselves the person we dream of being. I love this idea so much because at the end of the day, this is how Heavenly Father functions with us. And that's not always how I saw it. I actually did used to see Heavenly Father as the warmly authoritative dictator that it talks about here. Someone who sets really high expectations for his children, and when they don't obey, he's disappointed and he wants them to feel a little bit of shame and guilt, and he's not happy with them. I've since realized that a God worth worshiping, and honestly the God that we see in Jesus Christ, is not one who is so easily put off by what his children do or don't do. He is one who is unconditionally kind. That doesn't mean that he is a helicopter parent who prevents his children from ever experiencing the natural consequences of their actions, but he demonstrates unconditional kindness and charity towards us regardless of what we do. And that is actually what makes him God. I know that he does that because that's what he asks us to do. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus challenges us to turn the other cheek when someone hits us. He challenges us to, when someone asks for our coat, give them our coat and our cloak also. He challenges us to love our enemies, and he wouldn't ask us to do these things if that wasn't how he functioned too, if that wasn't how he treated his children too. Even when God's children are disrespecting him in every way possible, he feels love for them, and he might feel a bit of sorrow for their sake because he knows that they are blocking themselves from feeling his love, but his love is still there. And that's the kind of hero that I want to be for my kids. That's really how my relationship with God has changed since I had Breas. I started seeing him as the person that he really is, a loving father that, of course, I would want to worship and respect because he is the perfect embodiment of love and being unconditionally perfect despite what any human could ever do. And that really has laid the foundation of who I want to be as a parent. I've spent a lot of time contemplating who is this hero that I want to be for my kids? What does she say? What is her tone of voice? How does she treat other people? How does she dress? What does she spend her time doing? What is her attitude when someone asks her to help? I've tried to decondition or uncondition myself from the way that the world tells us we should be acting towards our children, that we need to withdraw our love in order to teach them a lesson. We need to give them a little bit of a cold shoulder in order to make sure that they feel the badness of whatever they've done. Now that I've removed that conditioning, I've decided that I want to be unconditional with my children. No matter what they do or say, I want to always be an example of the way that I want them to treat me. And this is really the whole reason that I started this podcast, is that I wanted to share with other parents how we can become unconditioned and how we can be unconditional. And what I mean by that is we are unconditioned from the way that the world says parenting has to look. We don't have to just fall in line with whatever we've seen modeled for us. If there are traditions and practices that don't resonate with true principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ, of the way that Jesus Christ teaches us to treat other people and to view other people, including children, then we can let go of that old conditioning. We can start thinking in higher and holier ways. We can decide what we want parenting to look like for us. We can stop using the excuse of, oh, I turned out okay, so I'll just do whatever I've seen done to me. We can really ask ourselves, regardless of how my children turn out, how do I want to show up as a parent? And that's where the unconditional piece comes in. Really taking full responsibility for the way that we see our children, the way that we talk to them, the way that we treat them, regardless of how they treat us or whatever they're struggling with, regardless of who's watching or who might be judging us. Really choosing to take full responsibility for our own behavior, regardless of what other people do. And we can do that by asking ourselves good questions like, if I was a child, how would I want to be treated in this moment? If I was acting the way that my child is, why would I be doing that? And what would be most helpful for me? Instead of just following this conditioned script of, if your child acts out, you have to do something bad to them. I know this episode might be a starter episode for some people. I want to link a few episodes in the show notes that really get at some of these concepts of how we can decondition ourselves from the way that the world tells us to view children, and also set ourselves up to be unconditionally the way that we want to be as parents, regardless of what our children do. And really, the more unconditionally we can show up as good examples to our children, the more we show them that it's possible to behave in respectful, kind, loving ways, no matter how hungry or tired or scared or upset they are. If we're able to model that as parents, that is the best indicator of whether our children are going to be able to grow up to be adults who do that as well. It's cool because Christ has promised us that with what measure we meet, that will be meted unto us again. The way that we treat others and the way that we treat our children is eventually how they are going to learn to treat others and to treat us. My job as a parent has become so much more simple than it used to be. It's not to follow a perfect sleep schedule. It's not to establish a perfect routine in my home. It's not to say all the right words. It is simply to, in every moment, be intentional about who I want to be as a person and unconditionally show up as that person, no matter how challenging it is, no matter how tired I am, no matter how much screaming there is going on in my home, no matter how messy things are, to always be operating in the way that I want to. And I'm not perfect at this. I don't expect myself to be perfect immediately. I think that's what this whole life is all about, is learning how to be unconditionally Christ-like. But it's a much more exciting adventure than spending my time worrying about how I can control my children and all the things I need to do and say to make sure they turn out a certain way and they look good and they're approved of by others. Really focusing on what's in my control and perfecting my own relationship with Christ and showing up in every moment the way that I think Jesus Christ would. That is what parenting means to me now. It's really not that different from anything else we do in this life. I truly don't believe it requires any special skill or education. All it requires is a mindset. And that's what I'm hoping to share with my podcast. I'm hoping to share the insights that have been valuable for me as I'm on this journey. And as I walk beside all the other parents out there, I don't see myself as better than anyone, any of it. I do see myself as super blessed to have these connections between amazing resources and the scriptures that help me view myself and my children and my husband and pretty much everyone around me with so much love, and also that help me be self-aware when I slip up and help me question where I'm coming from when I'm struggling, help me see how any problem in my life I'm creating by my own faulty way of viewing myself and those around me. I hope that sharing this story was helpful for you, especially for those out there who are new to parenting and have grown up similarly to how I have. If you've grown up as a perfectionist, but you know that that's not what you want for your children and you're looking for another way, I hope this hit home for you and I hope you continue listening. Becoming a parent has transformed my life. It has transformed my relationship with God, and it has transformed the way that I want to be a positive influence in this world. I don't want to do it through control and shaming and guilting people. I want to do it by setting an example and shining a light and letting other people come join along if they feel so inclined. You might have thought of someone as you're listening who this episode reminded you of, maybe someone that grew up as a type A person just like me, or someone who's a new parent and is looking for a fresh perspective that will help them see God and themselves and their children in ways that are more empowering and less fearful and control-based and more empowered. If you are a new listener and you're liking what you're hearing, leave a review and a rating. Those are extremely helpful. I am not making any money from this podcast, so the only way it will grow is if people share it. Every review, rating, and share means so much to me. I always love getting feedback. I don't expect everyone to agree with every single thing I say, but I love to hear when people do, and I also love to hear when people have additional thoughts or nuances that I haven't brought up. Feel free to hit me up on Instagram. That's probably the best place to find me. My Instagram is Brooklyn M as in Mary Bird. And with that, I will sign off and I will talk to you all next week.